I like nurses. I once had a girlfriend who was a nurse, and she was very fine. I've also had many experiences with nurses because it's been the destiny of my life to have been involved in many car accidents, a few motorbike accidents, a few bicycle accidents, and then I've also been, I hate using the words in as much as it pertains to me, but there's no other way to describe it. I've been a victim of violent crime, attempted murder. And so I've needed nurses on many occasions. And one thing I can tell you about nurses is when a nurse walks into the room, everything at once is better. She's direct. Well, I'm saying she because my experiences with nurses have been mostly nurses in the female form. She's direct. She's professional. She won't entertain anything that will distract her from the task at hand. One always feels that they're professional and they know more than what they're permitted to give away. And of course, there is the wonderful comfort one gets from such a nurse. So I've always appreciated nurses. However, I'm about to disingratiate myself to many people because I've come to be somewhat irritated by the tremendous adulation for nurses that exists on South African social media at the moment. And I suppose I've just lost half of you by... Now, for those of you who've remained, I suppose when one makes a statement like that, one needs to qualify it. And this is what I'm about to do. South Africa has, on average, between 12 and 15,000 deaths on the South African roads per year. Let's go easy on the statistic and call it 12,000, which means 1,000 people per month. South Africa has about 42,000 murders per year. Let's go easy on the statistics and call it 36,000, which means 3,000 people per month. And you know that for every car accident where someone dies, there were many more car accidents where people were badly injured, mutilated, had many things broken, or had their guts hang out and they get rushed into the ER, but they do survive, which is why they don't count as a road fatality. And of course, night after night in shebeens and clubs and all sorts of other places all over the country, there are many attempted murders, but they don't always succeed. I can vouch for that. And many people get booked into ER with their eyes poked out by bottles and slashes across the face or thigh, and narrowly missing vital organs in some cases because of some jealous thing or some drunken brawl that happened somewhere. This world is a violent and unfriendly place, and hardly anywhere more violent and unfriendly than right here in South Africa. So it stands to reason that a great many people pass through our hospital system, what remains of it, in a very bad state. And of course, the people to receive them are generally the nurses. But the roads have been closed. There are very few people driving around on the roads at the moment. And the clubs and the bars have been closed. I hope there are a few intrepid shebeens in Alexandria, Soweto, Tembisa, and many of those areas where you would find shebeens more frequently than in other areas in this country. And if you know of any such address, please point me in that direction, because I'm so hard up for a beer at this stage that I really would drive all the way to Johannesburg to go get myself that beer, or a few of those. But be it as it may, officially all these venues are closed, and they're usually the breeding grounds for violence, the sort of violence that makes people end up in hospitals. Yesterday, the 25th person died from COVID-19 in South Africa. And here are the stats about this victim of the global pandemic that has raged so viciously that it has taken 25 people in South Africa. This man was 61 years old. He was obese, he was a diabetic, and he suffered from hypertension. The average life expectancy for men in South Africa is 60.2 years, which means this man, in spite of his pre-existing conditions, managed to live beyond what is expected of a male in this country. Now, I put it to you that if you're obese, and you suffer from hypertension, and you're a diabetic, every second of every minute of every hour of every day is a dance, a walk with death, my friend. It's inevitable, and the Grim Reaper has you on the list and is heading your way, ever inching ever closer every moment. So my question is, did he die from COVID-19, or did he die with COVID-19? An interesting statistic is also that as the COVID-19 deaths worldwide have increased, the deaths from bronchitis, the deaths from pneumonia, all seem to have decreased. Now I'm wondering if some of those fatalities was assimilated in the broad pool of COVID-19. How clear is the distinction between dying from COVID and dying with COVID? You see, if I am HIV positive and I die in a car crash and I get to the hospital and they test me, my blood, and they see, oh well, he's HIV positive. Did I die from the car crash, or did I die from the HIV? The immunodisease. I think this is an important question that needs to be asked. But since the clubs are closed, since people aren't out on the streets, since people aren't driving around in vehicles, I think nurses in South Africa at the moment have it somewhat easier than usual. I think in terms of workload, things must be easier in our hospitals. Now, I haven't been to a hospital to check it out, but I wouldn't be surprised if I went there and I found that it was rather quiet, because given the great amount of serious injuries, near-death experiences that happen in South Africa on a daily basis, many of those have been cancelled out by the lockdown. So I don't think, and if I'm wrong, I do wish to be pointed in the right direction of knowledge, not to be attacked, preferably not, although I am fairly impervious to online attacks, because it's not quite as bad as sticks and stones now, is it? But if I am wrong, if any of you professionals would point me in the right direction, we know that it's been announced that there is a huge decline in criminality in South Africa since the lockdown. Well, go figure. And of course, there's an increase in abuse at home, but but is never a good word to say before you say that sentence, so cancel the but. Many people in South Africa live in abusive relationships, and if it doesn't happen while we're all forced together, it happens when we happen to be together at whatever moment. And hopefully this would serve as an impetus for folks to sever such relationships and to make a plan. I realize that for many of the vulnerable people in society, this is not an option, but given the fact that the police and the emergency workers are not overextended as they usually are, because we have these hugely unusual circumstances, perhaps they can pay more attention to these domestic abuses and hopefully bring some resolution to the torment that many of these vulnerable people suffer. And yet, in spite of the decline in so many conditions brought on by violence and by accidents in South Africa, there is a huge outpouring of sympathy. Appreciation is always good for nurses online, and I've noticed it, and I think it's somewhat misplaced, and I want to explain that in terms of, let's start with why it happens. It happens because fads. You see, after 9/11, the buildings crumbled and there were many firefighters in there because they were the first responders. And in that time, there was a huge emphasis placed on firefighters, and it was an emphasis that lasted for years thereafter, and until this day resonates in the average American mind. The importance of firefighters, the bravery of firefighters, and the collective feeling of goodwill, sympathy, support for firefighters. When the country is participating in a world sporting event, and perhaps the captain of the South African team leads his team to victory, there's a lot of focus on this captain, and suddenly the captain is a hero and even is held as an example of what great things may be achieved in South Africa. And Maybe we should even entrust this captain with some of our problems here in South Africa because he seems so well suited to the task, as we've seen many times in the past. But really, he's just an ordinary guy who has an extraordinary ability of perhaps kicking a ball into a net. But in any event, we make a huge fuss of such a captain, and we look into his past and we look into his circumstances, and we derive pleasure, enjoyment, and inspiration from him. And similarly, these factors are now at work in the healthcare services in South Africa, in the public response to healthcare workers. I see on social media a great outpouring of appreciation and sympathy. And the reason I mentioned what I suspect is a reduced workload for these healthcare workers in South Africa is because I think the sympathy, at least, is misplaced. And here's the reason why it annoys me somewhat. Because these nurses have a job, and it's a job that they can do. Yet, the taxi driver, who has an incredibly stressful job and an incredibly dangerous job, the taxi driver's job is more dangerous than the healthcare worker, than a nurse's job. And it's extremely stressful. And taxi drivers have to break the law, for example. Yes, you might say, no, Chris, they don't have to. They do have to. Because you have to drive the people and take them to work. There's 16 people, they're all going to work, and I have to take 3 loads this morning. So I have to go this side of the road on their shoulder, pass in the yellow line, go to the front, pass here on the blind side. If I see a car come, I push in. Because if you don't do it, you're not going to have the job, because you're not going to make the money. You're not going to turn the rands the way it's required of you. And another guy's going to get the job because everybody else, every other taxi driver is willing to do that. So it's a very difficult situation. I'm not trying to justify it. I'm trying to explain it. There is a huge difference. But be that as it may, the taxi drivers have a very stressful job. They're under tremendous pressure. And it's an extremely dangerous job, which is why they always travel with a punga here behind the seat, because you never know when you can need it. And then there are the turf wars about whose territory is served by whom and what are you doing here picking up people. It's a tough job. If you look online at the most dangerous jobs in South Africa, interestingly, you won't find farmers there, and I wonder how that comes. But what you would find there are firefighters, also in South Africa, paramedics. Now, paramedics are obviously in the medical industry, but they're not nurses. You see, they drive very fast. They do dangerous trips, and then they go to dangerous places because they have to go to the places where people got completely buggered up, where they lost a limb or got stabbed or they were in an accident. So it's a strange sort of job, and it's a dangerous job, and they are often in the bowels of society and in the bowels of the city doing their good work. And many of them suffer from the consequences of seeing the horrible things they see and dealing with the horrible things they deal with. So they're in the top 5. And then you have construction workers, also a very dangerous job. High there on a ledge, and suddenly the wind comes, and you go, there you go, goodbye, construction worker. Thank you very much for laying some bricks for society. Very dangerous job. Miners, the whole thing comes down. Sorry, miners, that's a dangerous job. 40 degrees, 3 kilometers below the surface of the earth. So, policemen, also a very dangerous job, because policemen die in South Africa from one of 2 things. Either they die because they were out there defending innocent civilians against the onslaught of ruthless, violent criminals, or they die from obesity, diabetes, and hypertension behind a stack of donuts at the engine stop. But it remains a very dangerous job. And these are the people I feel sorry for. I feel sorry for the small business owner who has 5, 10, perhaps 22 people to pay salaries to in this time when he's not making a cent, and he's wondering whether he should do the foreclosure now, whether he should file for insolvency now and beat the rush. I feel sorry for the truck driver who wants to get his stuff, but he gets to the depot, he's willing to work, he's allowed to work, he's deemed an essential service, but the people who receive the stuff at the depot are not there. They haven't come to work. I feel sorry for those brave, those intrepid souls who wake up every morning at 5 or 6 and then sit in traffic and drive for anything from a half hour to 3 hours if you're going from Johannesburg to Pretoria on the N1 to get to their job, sit behind a computer and slave away all day afterwards to just hang up everything and get back in the car and sit in the traffic and go back home in time for a little TV show, maybe a meal and some time with the kids and good night, and then tomorrow we'll do the same thing again, who are now sitting at home wondering if there'll be a job for them once this lockdown is done, because we're having a tremendous impact on the economy at this very moment, and the economy will never be the same. I feel sorry for them. So one thing that the nurses do have is stress, of course, because you walk around with a mask and you're always worried that you will that you might catch the virus and take it home to your family. So that is a level of stress, but it's a level of stress that in equal measure is experienced by those ladies at the checkout counter in grocery stores all over the country that do remain open. I was there recently and I didn't see one of them with a mask or anything. I think it just becomes impractical at some stage. I don't know what the reason is for that. But what was interesting, in the queue that waited, it was a very long queue, but the people were standing 6 feet apart. All the white people, they were wearing the masks. The black people were not wearing the masks. Of course, I was a black people at that time because this is how I believe it. And so there's that stress, and I still think that stress, given the fact that you're wearing this mask for 12 hours a day and you're afraid of taking that home to your family, the fact that 25 people have died so far from COVID-19 in South Africa sort of diminishes the prospects of this being quite as serious, at least statistically at this stage, as the dilemma of the 16 passengers and the one driver in the minibus taxi, because the chances of them not making it home safe to their family and their family crumbling because they are the sole breadwinners, the way it works in South Africa, is something that should probably generate considerably more stress, and that is not under unusual circumstances. That's just run-of-the-mill. That's just daily life. What I'm saying is people go online and it's a drug. And today I go online and I need to love somebody and I need to hate somebody. So I'm going to hate Chris for saying things about nurses. Why? And I'm going to love, well, nurses are a good thing to love at the moment. And everybody pours their songs, their psalms and their songs for the nurses. And that's really sweet. But it's fashionable. That's really what it boils down to. And I'm sorry if I offend any nurses. I'm not trying to diminish the importance of your work and my own personal gratitude for the work that you do in any way. But I do feel that the adulation is synthetic. And the adulation is stimulated and the adulation is fashionable. And I do believe that there should be a general adulation for all good men and women of this country who go out and work and make things happen. And there should be a great amount of sympathy reserved for the multitudes who are now living in extremely uncertain times and don't know whether they'll be able to face the financial demands of this world once this whole thing, whenever that is, gets lifted. In the meantime, I would like to remind you that I do like nurses.